Hey guys, YouTube 100 here. Alright, now here I am continuing on with these rise and fall of John Hughes reviews. Yeah. And like I said in my last review, now is when we're going to start getting into the movies that John Hughes wrote after Home Alone 2. Yeah. And next up, this is going to be a review for Dennis the Menace. So yeah, so like I've said before, like it really does seem to be like a popular consensus that pretty much everything John Hughes wrote after Home Alone 2 really was just like was pretty bad. Yeah, yeah, and plus yeah, this really was just like when like John Hughes' career really just basically started to turn to shit. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So by that, you can probably guess that like when this film came out, like this film was like one of the first films that John Hughes wrote after Home Alone 2. I'm not sure if like this was actually the film that he wrote like immediately after Home Alone 2. I'm not sure if like he may have done like some other ones in between, but yeah, this was really like the first notable film that John Hughes wrote after Home Alone 2. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, and yeah, this film yeah, like this film really did not get a lot of love when it came out. Like yeah, both critics and audiences really like didn't really seem to really enjoy this film that much. Yeah. As far as how I feel about the movie personally, I remember I did actually watch this movie a lot as a kid. Like as a kid, I really did enjoy this movie. Like as a kid, I actually really did like it. Yeah, and I really think that's what it really comes down to. Like I really think that it really depends on what age you are if you really are gonna like this movie. Like for kids, I do think that this movie is just fine. I do think that kids will probably really enjoy this movie. Adults, on the other hand, I don't know. I mean, it really just really comes down to really like what kind of humor that you really like to see in a movie. Yeah, yeah, because yeah, this movie like the movie really does kind of seem to really follow the Home Alone formula because yeah, this movie really did like have like a lot of slapstick in it. Like if you know Dennis the Menace, you really do like kind of like know what the formula for Dennis the Menace really is. Like Dennis the Menace, what it really is like there's a this boy named Dennis, and what it really does consist of is that he's like always like wanting to be around his neighbor Mr. Wilson, who's like an older man, probably like in his like 60s. Yeah. Yeah. And he really just like causes Mr. Wilson just so much stress. Like he's always like causing Mr. Wilson pain in one form or another, but he's never actually meaning to do it. Yeah, and that is pretty much like what like Dennis the Menace really is like known for. Yeah. So yeah, so Dennis the Menace, it was originally created as a comic strip in the 50s by Hank Ketchum. Yeah, and then yeah, then it just like it spawned like a whole bunch of like projects. Like there was like the TV show from the 50s, like the sitcom in black and white. Then you got the cartoon in the 80s. Yeah, and then it really just did spawn like movies like this. Like this was like the first live action Dennis the Menace movie. Yeah, and then it did like spawn like a sequel, a direct to video sequel, a few years later. And then yeah, then we've also it also like kind of like spawned like another TV movie like in the early or mid 2000s. Don't remember exactly when. Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, and like the Angry Video Game Nerd has mentioned before, like when Dennis the Menace was originally released, of course, like in the UK, there was another character that was also named Dennis the Menace that was released the exact same day. So yeah, so just like it's kind of like been sort of like a battle of wills between the two different versions over the years. Yeah, and even like for some distinction, like the UK later labeled like their version of Dennis the Menace as Dennis the Menace and Nasher, and even like for like this Dennis the Menace, like our version, the American version, like they don't actually label him as Dennis the Menace. They just call him Dennis. Yeah, and that's what this movie was actually titled in the UK, just Dennis. Yeah. So yeah, so yeah, so I guess like I yeah, I guess like they just like it's just a total coincidence that like both versions were released on the exact same day. Yeah, but anyway, yeah. Getting back to this movie, yeah, it really does really seem to really like as far as like what adults would feel about the movie, like it really just depends on like what kind of humor that you're really into. I mean, this movie really just does have like a lot of slapstick in it. Yeah, following like a Home Alone 2, like John Hughes like really like just really seemed to really change his writing style, and I really do feel that that is really like what did really like cause like pretty much all of his movies after Home Alone 2 really to just not turn out very good. Yeah, I think like after like John Hughes wrote like the two Home Alone movies, like given that how successful they were, he just decided that he wanted to go down a different path and really just like have like pretty much like all of his movies from that point on really kind of like follow in the same direction as the Home Alone movies, and he added like a lot of slapstick to his movies because, yeah, I really did have noticed that like following a Home Alone 2, like pretty much like John Hughes' notable movies after Home Alone 2 really do like have a lot of slapstick in them. So yeah, so I feel that like John Hughes really just like because of like how successful the two Home Alone movies were, he decided that he wanted to make like his following movies similar to Home Alone with including like a lot of slapstick in them. But yeah, it really didn't turn out very good, and yeah, a lot of and the films really just really like they really did not succeed, and they really were really not very beloved. Yeah, I mean they really did get a lot of hate, and yeah, and yeah, it just really John Hughes' plan really just backfired. All right, yeah, yeah. As far as yeah, so that really is why I feel that like this movie really didn't turn out very good, and it really didn't receive a lot of love because yeah, just the slapstick really just seemed to be like kind of overkill, and it's like that was really like what the humor was really like set around. Like a lot, pretty much the entire humor of this film really is just like slapstick. That really is like where the comedy really comes. There's really not really any other sort of humor in it. Yeah. But yeah, like I said, like it really comes down to like what age you are. Like if you are like a kid or if you've got kids, they probably will actually enjoy this movie. But yeah, there's probably not really a whole lot really for adults to really enjoy about the film. Yeah. As far as like how I feel the movie really is, like I don't know if it really does like because I actually did enjoy the movie as a kid, and even now I can still watch it. Like I still don't have any problems watching it now. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess like the film, like while it probably really isn't necessarily like I, it's not really like probably like good. It's not a horrible movie. Like I still really don't think it's horrible. Like there are performances in the movie that really do stand out. Like this movie does like have a Walter Matthau as Mr. Wilson in the movie, and yeah, Walter Matthau is a pretty good Mr. Wilson. He really just does get down like the grumpy old man attitude of Mr. Wilson. So Walter Matthau is pretty good in the movie. Yeah, and I guess I will point out like what many other people have. Like if you have seen this movie, like when you do see Walter Matthau as in this movie, you may like see that he really does bear like a very uncanny resemblance to Saddam Hussein. Yeah, I mean Walter Matthau just he looks like so much like Saddam Hussein in this movie. Yeah, and people have really like made jokes about that over the years about this movie. Yeah, yeah, and as far as like other actors in this movie, like this movie does feature cast members like Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, and Joan Plowright, right? Paul Winfield, yeah, and they all do overall. I guess they do fine. Yeah, even the kid who plays Dennis in this movie, Dennis is played by a kid named Mason Gamble. I think that overall he does just fine. I mean, yeah, this I really haven't seen him in anything else other than this movie, so this was pretty much like the only notable role he had in his career. Yeah, and I guess like he overall is pretty good. I mean, he's not really like he's not really annoying in the movie. Like he's like as you're watching him, you're not really like just getting annoyed by him throughout the movie. So yeah, and I think that he does just fine in the movie. Like I think he does a good job of just acting like this innocent little boy that really is just like really like not aware of like the misery that he's causing Mr. Wilson. And yeah, and even like when like he does like get a sad moment in the movie, like you really do actually sympathize with him. So yeah, so I do think that overall he does have a pretty solid performance in the movie. Yeah, and I guess like you're probably gonna just see a lot of people will probably just see him as this cute little boy really in the movie. Yeah, so I guess like he does his job just fine in the movie. So yeah, so I guess like the performances in the movie really are not that bad. And yeah, it's just that really they don't really have a lot to work with within the movie. And the movie also does have a pretty good score. Like the music in this movie is done by Jerry Goldsmith, and yeah, and he of course it's Jerry Goldsmith, so he never disappoints. The music in this movie is really great, especially like the theme for Dennis in the movie, like dun 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, so yeah, the music in the movie is pretty good too. And this movie also was under the direction of Nick Castle. Yeah, and Nick Castle, like I really haven't like heard a whole lot about like what he's done, but yeah, he was the director of the Disney Channel movie "Twas the Night," which I've talked about before. Yeah, and he also helped write the story for Hook. Yeah, and interestingly enough, he also did play Michael Myers in some of the Halloween movies. That's something that I didn't know until recently. Yeah. So yeah, yeah. So it is kind of like interesting that the actor who played Michael Myers was also a director at one point. Yeah. Yeah. And I think overall he did like a decent job of directing. Like he did like at least give the actors like solid enough direction where at least they were able to like give some decent performances. Yeah. So yeah. So overall, like I said, the film probably really doesn't really work that well because yeah, there is a lot that really doesn't work about it, and yeah, there really isn't like really like any sort of humor other than just slapstick, and the slapstick can probably get like old for a lot of people at some point in the movie. So yeah, but yeah, like I said, like if you are a kid and you watch this movie, I do think that this probably will be a film that you will like. So yeah, so it really comes down to really what age you are on how much you're really going to enjoy this movie. Yeah, but me personally, I don't really think that it really is like a terrible movie. And so yeah, and John Hughes did like do some worse films after this. So yeah, so this really is not John Hughes's worst film by any means. But yeah, but I will say that like for John Hughes standards, especially like coming off like Home Alone 2. Now, this was like a pretty big step down for John Hughes. Yeah, but overall, like I do think that it is overall a a decent enough movie, and it does have like some moments that I really do think are legitimately funny. Like as I'm watching this movie, there are like a moments in the movie, like with the slapstick, that really just has me busting a gut laughing. Yeah, some of the slapstick in the movie really is funny, whether it is like stuff that happens to Mr. Wilson in the movie, or even stuff that does happen to the villain of the movie, Switchblade Sam, towards the end of the movie. Which, yeah, if you've seen this movie, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So yeah, so some stuff does at least work about it. So it's hard to really say that this movie really doesn't have anything to offer. So yeah, so I guess I would probably give this movie around 2.5 stars out of 4. Yeah, some people may think that is like kind of a high rating, but I personally do think that the movie is all right. Okay, all right. So I'm already 14 minutes into this review. So yeah, so let me just start talking about the premise of the movie. Yeah. So yeah, so in this movie, Dennis is 5 years old. Yeah, Dennis's age in like all the Dennis the Menace project, whether it's the comic strip or the sitcom or the cartoon or whatever. Yeah, his age always kind of like varies. So yeah, so I'm not really gonna look at his age really as an inconsistency. Yeah. So yeah, it shows how like Dennis really is like always getting under Mr. Wilson's skin. Yeah, and yeah, and it shows like one morning as Dennis is like trying to go visit Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson is really just trying to get Dennis to leave him alone, and Mr. Wilson just ends up pretending to be asleep in bed sick. Yeah. And when Dennis came up to Mr. Wilson's room, when he saw all the medicine by Mr. Wilson's bedside, he did believe that Mr. Wilson was sick. So he tried to give Mr. Wilson an aspirin, and he ended up because he was afraid of Mr. Wilson possibly biting his fingers. Dennis then just used his slingshot to shoot the aspirin into Mr. Wilson's mouth. Yeah, if you know Dennis the Menace, you do know that Dennis does carry a slingshot around. Yeah. So yeah, so he shot the aspirin into Mr. Wilson's mouth, but then it just Mr. Wilson just ended up spitting it up, and Dennis just ended up running out of the house, and Mr. Wilson just yelled at Dennis not to come back again. Yeah. Then when Dennis's parents found out about Dennis shooting the aspirin into Mr. Wilson's mouth, they tried to keep Dennis from actually going over to Mr. Wilson's house, but Mr. Wilson really didn't want it to really be like that because he didn't want to come across as a child hater. Yeah, so he just wanted Dennis to behave himself if he comes over. Yeah, yeah. Then it also showed how Dennis's mom was starting a job herself. Yeah, so he brought Dennis over to a girl bully, Margaret Wade's house for him to be looked after, along with Dennis's best friend Joey was also there as well. Yeah, yeah, then it showed how they decided to just make a fort out of an abandoned tree house. Oh, so yeah, but yeah, as they were working on it, it showed that there was this a homeless thief, Switchblade Sam, who was played by Christopher Lloyd. He then arrived into town. It showed how he was sneaking aboard trains and jumping off on them to uh, walk around new towns to rob. Yeah, and it showed throughout the film he was robbing, he was just stealing a bunch of different stuff. There was at one point where as Dennis, Joey, and Margaret were working on the fort, uh, Switchblade Sam ended up stealing Margaret's baby doll. Yeah, and it showed he was just stealing a whole bunch of stuff throughout the movie. He was stealing some jewelry boxes, a woman's purse, and yeah, just some other stuff throughout the film as well, including something else which would become a factor later on in the movie, which I'll talk about later. Yeah, and yeah, then at one point, as Dennis was cleaning up a mess in the garage after he accidentally dropped a paint can, he was using some sort of leaf blower or a vacuum cleaner or something to clean it up. And yeah, then he ended up accidentally shooting a big glob into the air, and it landed into Mr. Wilson's barbecue grill when he was using it to cook. Then as Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, yeah, Mrs. Wilson was played by Joan Plow, right? Yeah, and of course, if you know Dennis the Menace, you know that while Mr. Wilson, he is always just very annoyed by Dennis, always calling him a menace. Mrs. Wilson is really a grandmother figure towards Dennis, the nice woman, and just trying to just assure her husband that Dennis is only a boy. Yeah, yeah, and but yeah, as Mr. and Mrs. Wilson were eating, Mr. Wilson could taste the paint on his food, and then he then suspected Dennis being behind it. So that night, Mr. Wilson went to investigate the Mitchell's garage just to find proof of Dennis fooling around with paint. Yeah, and as he was, Dennis also was pranking his babysitter that night, Polly, along with her boyfriend Mickey. And Mickey in the film, he was actually played by Devin Ratray, who played Buzz in Home Alone movies. Well, the first two, and I guess now Home Sweet Home Alone. Yeah, he was pranking them by he snuck out of the house and was rang the doorbell and went to hide. Yeah, then eventually, then Polly and Mickey then decided to and take action to it. So then they taped a thumbtack to the doorbell, and then they got ready to got some flour and water ready to drop on the prankster. Yeah, and then it showed as Mr. Wilson was investigating the garage, he then investigated the leaf blower or vacuum, yeah, and he ended up like accidentally like sucking up a golf ball in the vacuum and then shot it out and hit him right in the gonads. Yeah. Yeah. Then, as Dennis was about to like pull the prank again, Mr. Wilson was starting to approach, and Dennis then just ran off to the back and got back inside. Yeah, and then Mr. Wilson rang the doorbell, and he got pricked with the thumbtack, and then Polly and Mickey then just covered Mr. Wilson in the water and flour, which is pretty funny. Yeah, and it showed that like when Mr. Wilson like went back home and Mrs. Wilson opened the door, she even laughed at him. Yeah. Then the following morning, as Dennis then like tried to leave an apology card for Mr. Wilson, as he left it up in the bathroom for Mr. Wilson, Dennis like came across Mr. Wilson's dentures, and as he was messing around with those, he then ended up like smacking them together, knocking the two front teeth out. Them, yeah. Then Dennis ended up replacing them with chiclets. Yeah. Then that morning, Mr. Wilson was getting his picture taken because Mr. Wilson ended up like getting selected by a garden club to hold hold a summer floraganza to show his a 40-year-old flower that he's been planting. Yeah, yeah. So then, yeah, he had his picture taken for that, and yeah, when he smiled for the picture, it then revealed the chiclets, which was a pretty funny moment too. Yeah, and yeah, then eventually, the police chief of the town then confronted Switchblade Sam, and the police chief was played by Paul Winfield. And I found this interesting because, of course, like Paul Winfield also was like one of the he was the chief in the first Terminator movie. So I find it interesting that he played a cop in this film too. Yeah. Then Dennis's parents then were in a bind because both of them had business trips scheduled at the same time, so they had to find a babysitter for Dennis. But yeah, as they were like just going through like all the numbers in their address book, everybody just kept hanging up on them, and so then and they had to like turn to the Wilsons to watch Dennis, which Mrs. Wilson like like willingly accepted it. Yeah, but Mr. Wilson, of course, like didn't want it. But yeah, he basically had no choice for it. Yeah, yeah. And so then, as Dennis then was staying at the Wilsons' house, like that night, like Dennis like as he was taking his bath, he ended up like just like dropping a whole bunch of soapy water on the floor, and afterwards, like he was like messing around with Mr. Wilson's nasal spray and was spraying it all over the place and emptied the bottle. then Dennis then decided to just fill up the bottle with Mr. Wilson's mouthwash, and then he refilled the mouthwash bottle with some toilet cleanser. We got this the really hilarious scene that night when Mr. Wilson then went to the bathroom. He like slipped on the floor from the soapy water and did the splits. And yeah, then he gargled with the mouthwash, which was really toilet cleanser, and then he just spit that all over the place and rinsed his mouth out with water. And yeah, then he used the nasal spray and sprayed it up his nose, but being mouthwash, it just burned, and he screamed like a girl, and then just dumped his head in the sink full with water. Yeah. Yeah. Then that night, as Mr. and Mrs. Wilson were in bed, Mrs. Wilson was really just like talked about how like she really feels that like they could have like had children, but Mr. Wilson really was just turning it away. Yeah. Then as Mrs. Wilson then got up and went to have a cup of tea, then Mr. Wilson then like realized that he really was like not really being very compassionate or anything. So then, as he went down to apologize, he then like saw who he thought was Mrs. Wilson in the chair in the living room, and as he was like just apologizing for everything, he then like went in for a kiss. But then it was revealed that it was really Dennis's dog Ruff. That was pretty funny. Yeah. Then the following day, as Mr. Wilson was like setting up for the garden party, as he was looking for garden lanterns in the attic, Dennis was up there just like messing with a whole bunch of stuff, and he ended up like just spilling mothballs all over the floor, and Mr. Wilson ended up like slipping over them. Yeah, then a canoe almost like crushed Mr. Wilson, barely missed him. Yeah, then it showed them the garden lanterns then just rolling down, burying Mr. Wilson. Yeah, yeah, and yeah. Then later that day, for the garden party, Dennis was joining Mr. and Mrs. Wilson for the party. Yeah, it showed how like all the guests like came up to Dennis and were just like pinching his cheeks and everything. Then Mr. Wilson then just came up to Dennis and not to embarrass him, and just that look on Dennis's face with like his messy hair and red cheeks. It was pretty funny. Yeah, and yeah. Then as Mr. Wilson was being presented with a plaque and just like making a speech about the flower, Dennis ended up like opening the garage door and knocked over like the dessert table for the party, knocking all the desserts down. And yeah, then when Mr. Wilson saw the wreckage, and then he just uh, threw Dennis out of the party, and Dennis was just waiting inside the house. Yeah. Then it showed Switchblade Sam then like arriving, and then he ended up finding Mr. Wilson's gold that he keeps in a safe that looks like books. Yeah, and Switchblade Sam ended up stealing that. But as he was leaving, like he stomped on a piece that he dropped, and Dennis heard it. And as Dennis went down after Switchblade Sam left, then Dennis then saw the gold was stolen, and then as it showed that as Mr. and Mrs. Wilson and all the guests were like just sitting outside waiting for the flower to bloom, because this was the time when the flower would actually bloom and blossom. Yeah. Dennis then raced down and then just yelled to Mr. Wilson, alerting him of the robbery, and it just ended up distracting Mr. Wilson, and he ended up missing the blossoming. Yeah. And Mr. Wilson then just was just so angry about his 40 years worth of work being wasted. Then he just really just shamed Dennis, just saying that he's a pest, a menace, and just a selfish, spoiled little boy, and that the blooming meant more to him than Dennis ever will. Then Dennis really just feeling so guilty about it. Then he just ran away. He took his bike and then just ran, uh, rode off, and then off. Yeah. Then, but Mrs. Wilson very quickly noticed Dennis was missing, and she called the police. And it showed Dennis's mom arriving home also saw that he was missing. Yeah. Then it showed Dennis then riding off into the woods, and he then eventually ran into Switchblade Sam. And yeah. Then when Mr. Wilson found out about Dennis is missing, and he also then also learned that Dennis was telling the truth about the robbery. Then Mr. Wilson then really realized that he was the cause of Dennis running away and Dennis missing, yeah, and just thought over everything that he said to Dennis, yeah. So then Mr. Wilson then went out and searched for Dennis as well, yeah. And then it showed pretty much everybody in the neighborhood really was looking for Dennis, yeah, yeah. Then in the woods with Dennis and Switchblade Sam. Switchblade Sam was just telling Dennis that he would be Switchblade Sam's hostage. Yeah, and then yeah, that just showed how Dennis really was just really annoying Switchblade Sam. Yeah, and then as Dennis really tried to really show Switchblade Sam how good he is with a slingshot, as Dennis fired off a marble, the marble came back and hit Switchblade Sam right in the head. Yeah. Then as Dennis really was trying to uh work with the fire that Switchblade Sam had going, ended up knocking an ash or something into Switchblade Sam's butt. Then he went crazy. And then he just jumped into a lake. But yeah, in the lake there was this table or something in the water that Switchblade Sam kept landing on every time he jumped in. Yeah. Yeah. Then when Switchblade Sam tried to tie up Dennis, Dennis just told him that he's not doing it the right way, and there's only one way to get the rope to really fit Dennis since he's so small. Yeah. Then as he showed Switchblade Sam how to do it, and even cuffed him to the rope as well. Well, as he went for the key to free Switchblade Sam, he ended up like tripping, and the key ended up like falling into the pot of beans that Switchblade Sam had cooking. So then, to try to get the key back, then Dennis really just fed Switchblade Sam the beans. But as he went through like the entire pot, then they they couldn't find it, and realized that Switchblade Sam must have swallowed it. And yeah, then you just like had all this like funny stuff with Dennis and Switchblade Sam, like pretty much just like causing him the same pain that he caused Mr. Wilson. Like there was this one point where he dropped a piece of firewood from up high and it hit Switchblade Sam right in the head. Yeah, yeah. Then at one point, Dennis then ended up like accidentally flinging like a golden jewelry box right into Switchblade Sam's forehead. Yeah. Then at one point, then he accidentally set Switchblade Sam on fire, which is pretty funny. Yeah, and then Switchblade Sam like ended up like jumping into the water again, hitting that table or whatever again. Yeah. Then as Dennis like threw Switchblade Sam some ropes to try to get him out, Dennis then eventually then like discovered Mr. Wilson's gold, and then he realized Switchblade Sam was a thief, and then Switchblade Sam grabbed his switchblade knife. Yeah, that's why he's called a Switchblade Sam, is because he like carried around a switchblade knife all the time, and we saw him use it throughout the film. Yeah, and yeah, then as he was about to stab Dennis, then like a passing train caught a piece of the rope. That Switchblade Sam had, and so then it like pulled Switchblade Sam up high, and then eventually the rope then ended up coming loose from the train, and Switchblade Sam fell back down onto that table or whatever again, and then his Switchblade knife ended up like falling down and sticking right in his butt once again. Yep. Yeah. Then the following morning, then, as Mr. Wilson was still waiting for Dennis outside, he eventually then heard Dennis's bike approaching, and then Dennis then arrived back home with Switchblade Sam tied up in the wagon attached to the back of his bike. Yeah. Then Dennis then reunited with Mr. Wilson. They embraced in a hug, and then Dennis also reunited with his parents, and then the all the kids in the neighborhood then were came aimed to embrace Dennis as well. Yeah, and then it showed Switchblade Sam was then taken by the police. He's being arrested. Yeah, and then Dennis then like tried to give Switchblade Sam his switchblade back, but then as Switchblade Sam took it and had to point at Dennis again, and the police then just closed the door on his arm and ended up just dropping the knife in the sewer, and then Switchblade Sam then was taken away. Yeah, yeah. Then that night, as Dennis was like roasting marshmallows, as the Mr. and Mrs. Wilson and Dennis's parents were like talking on the porch. And as his mom was talking about how she won't have to travel anymore, and there's also her office is now starting a daycare center so she can take Dennis to work with her. Mr. Wilson really was just like saying that like they would be willing to watch him, and when the Mitchells really were just like very like really like not really sure about that, given that how many times Dennis upset Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson really was just like assuring them that kids are kids and you got to play by their rules, and that you got to rule with the punches and expect the unexpected. And then it showed like Dennis couldn't put a fire out of the marshmallow that he was roasting. So then as he was like waving it around trying to put it out, then the marshmallow then just like flung off, and then it went towards Mr. Wilson and then hit him right in the forehead. Then that's how the movie ended. But as the credits started to roll, then we had like this scene with Dennis at his mom's office, and it showed that there was like one of Dennis's mom's co-workers that is really like very condescending, was like trying to copy some papers. Because as Dennis was sitting in the copying room, he was like wanting to push the button, and then he pushed the print button, and then it showed Andrea just getting like caught in the photocopier machine, and then it just showed Dennis running off as the just like copies of Andrea caught in the machine were printing. Yeah, and that's how the movie ended. So like I said, like this film, like the enjoyment really comes down to if you can really like put up with all the slapstick, and whether you're a kid or you're an adult. Like I said, I really did enjoy this movie a lot as a kid. So yeah, so if you are a kid or if you've got kids, the kids will probably really enjoy the film. But for adults, the slapstick will probably get old for you at after a point, and yeah, it really will just become like overkill, and yeah, so it really just comes down to that. Yeah, so but yeah, like I said, I really don't think the film really is that bad. I mean, I don't know if I would go so far as to call it good, but it's not horrible. It, it does at least have that a Dennis the Menace feel to it. Yeah, so it's really not John Hughes' worst film, but yeah, by his standards, and especially coming off the heels of Home Alone 2, and even like the other movies that I've already talked about, yeah, this really does seem like a big step down. But still, it's not a terrible movie. So yeah, so yeah, if you got kids, they can give it a watch and they'll probably enjoy it. But yeah, as far as everybody else, just all I can say is check the film out and make your own conclusion whether you like it or not. All right, so like I said, I give the film 2.5 stars out of 4. All right. So yeah. So I guess that's all I can really say about it. All right. So this was from my review of Dennis the Menace. So I hope you guys did enjoy this review. Yeah. And like I said, this really is not John Hughes' worst film. Yeah. And plus, yeah, and especially given the next film I'm going to talk about, you can really see how bad John Hughes films can really get. So yeah. So yeah, we'll just see how bad they can get in my next review. So stay tuned for that coming up next. All right. But I hope you guys did enjoy this review. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.